Okay, today I want to make a video about the Safavid Empire and its military. Uh, I did my last video about Khorasan miniatures, um, which has a new Safavid range. I didn't know that until after I made the video. They just released it in March according to their Facebook page. But I'm not on Facebook, so I don't normally check that stuff anyway. So who were the Safavids? So they were the dynasty that led Iran or Persia, however you like, from about 1500 to the early, 1723. So they're also the reason why, the modern country of Iran is a Shi'i Muslim country. So if you know a little bit about Islamic history, there's two main sects or denominations. You have Sunni, which is the Arab states, and then you have Shi'i, which is mostly today in the modern country of Iran. But of course, there's other smaller minorities elsewhere, notably in Turkey and Eastern Anatolia. There's a levy. They're called the levies, but essentially they are the Turkish Shi'i group. But before that, Persia had been mostly Sunni, and it's through this basically charismatic movement led by the first Shah of the Safavid dynasty, Ismail. And I'm going to be reading parts of a chapter from a recent book called The Safavid World, edited by Rudy Mate, I think, is how it's pronounced. And the chapter I'm looking at it from that book is called The Safavid Army, Continuity and Change by Willem Floor. And both the editor of the book and this author of the chapter are both pretty accomplished Safavid historians. And the book is published by Routledge. So if you look up the Safavid World Routledge, you can find it. Of course, you can always find these books online because they are just prohibitively expensive in most cases, even for me. Well, especially for me. The early Safavid military, we could say, or movement, is mostly made up of these semi-nomadic Turkomans, which lived in eastern Anatolia and in this part of Iran. One of these heritages of the Mongol Empire, and the two states that had been there was the Ak-Konlu and the Kara-Konlu. One means Ak means white, or sorry, Kara means black, Ak means white. But one means black sheep, the other means white sheep. Nobody really knows why they were called that, but that was the name of their confederacies. But basically they were tribal confederations. So if we think about the military, it would be horse archers and mostly mounted troops. And as Willem Floor writes, when Shah Ismail I left Lahijan with only 20 men, he went out to seize power. Having arrived at Erzincan in northeastern Anatolia, he sent messages throughout Azerbaijan and Anatolia to ask his followers to join him. Marching from Erzincan towards Shirvan in September 1500, he was gradually followed by 7,000 followers, many of whom were adventurers drawn by the prospects of booty. In his first battle against the Shirvan Shah, the Akunlu, the Kurds, and the Uzbeks consisted of typical Eurasian traditional cavalry attacks. What Ismail's soldiers lacked in proper military equipment, protective dress and equipment, they made up for in battle fervor. And just so you understand the geography, because it is confusing, they're talking about the area on the map that's the Azerbaijan area, and this is a French map, so Chirvan, Baku, so that the South Caucasus, or north of Tabriz, where those two rivers are, essentially. And later, so they have a confrontation about 15 years later, 14 years later, at Chaldiran, major battle in Ottoman history. Both his men, led by the charismatic demigod Ismail, and again, he's like kind of a charismatic leader. That's how he's presented, and I think it's pretty true. I mean, there's got to be something there if he's able to attract this many people. The growing Safavid army. Now back to reading the chapter. The growing Safavid army each time decisively crushed numerically larger and better armed enemies. Both his men and he himself believed that they were invincible until they were crushed by the Ottomans at Chaldiran in 1514. Sultan Selim, who reigned from 1512 to 20, had learned from the defeats of large Ottoman forces against Anatolian followers of Ismail during the Kizilbash revolt in 1511. And Kizilbash refers to those Eastern Anatolian Turkomans that embrace Shi'i Islam, although it's not all religious. I mean, a lot of it's because the Ottoman state is growing, it's centralizing, and these nomads don't really want to be forced to have to pay taxes or be administered in a formal way. Also, I mean, that was a serious religious, on par with the wars of religion in Europe, basically. I mean, Sultan Selim massacres tens of thousands of these Kizilbash Shi'is in eastern Anatolia. But continuing with our reading here. Therefore, when he set out to face Shah Ismail himself, he brought a new element into battle, that of field guns. It was not that Ismail was not aware of the use of guns. In fact, he had occasionally used cannon in siege operations. But he had never faced them in battle. Despite repeated fierce attacks, the Safavid army was literally blown away by the Ottoman guns. I think Chaldiran is on this map. Let me see. It doesn't look like they have Chaldiran marked, but it's in eastern Anatolia, so where it says Armenia is marked, and you see Diyarbakir, it's in that region of Turkey, present-day Turkey. Ismail I learned from his defeat. He realized that facing the Ottomans and Uzbeks again in the traditional manner would be suicidal, and that avoiding such fate would require firearms. The use of modern arms was only a normal development, given the fact that Safavid's main contenders for power, the Ottomans and the Uzbeks, also used them. However, the acquisition of modern arms by itself was not a decisive factor in improving the Safavid's army capability, or even giving it an edge. I'm going to cut in with my commentary for a minute. I don't know if I agree with that necessarily, but anyway, it is what it did with those arms that made a difference, or not, and then it was the challenge that Ismail and his successors faced. Okay, I prejudged. I do agree. I do see the point he's making now, and I agree with that. They quickly adapted to the use of firearms and made them part of their tactics in facing hostile forces. As a result, henceforth, the Ottoman and Safavid armies were very much alike, and there was symmetry in warfare. However, despite this military adaptation, much also remained the same. What were the constraints in the way that way changing continuity took place in the Safavids' military capability. And then he goes on to outline the article. I'm not going to read the whole thing on the video, but I am going to read a little bit more to give you an idea of the army composition, because I think that would be the most useful for doing wargaming. The Safavid military consisted of a regular army of cavalry and auxiliaries. The regular army consisted of a standing army of crack troops formed by the Shah's household troops, or Kerchis, who were mainly recruited from among the Qizilbash tribesmen. It further consisted of regular national levies, so-called Yasak or Cherik troops, mainly composed of Turkoman tribesmen, Georgian and other non-Turkoman groups. The household troops were always in attendance, either at the royal court or in the provincial towns, or could be called upon for service when needed. The creation of the Kerchis dates from around 1500, when they are mentioned for the first time in Safavid sources. The head of the Kerchi troops bore the title of Kerchibashi, and nearly always selected from the corps itself. Kerchis were mainly recruited from among the Qizilbash tribes. During the 16th century, the Kerchi corps was never bigger than 6,000 men. In the 17th century, the number of Kerchis would grow to 10,000 and even 20,000 men. And then he describes, the Yasak and Cherik troops, basically the feudal levies. They were financed with revenue assignments on provincial revenues and mobilized all over Persia. Some communities, such as Christians, were not obliged to provide men, but then had to pay a tax, and they had to pay a tax instead of fighting, basically. In addition to the regular troops, tribal or otherwise, there were also auxiliaries, Ashar from the local population that was called upon to defend their own town or rural district. This part of the army generally was badly armed and equipped. In addition, I guess maybe perennial truism in military history, in addition to their combatant role, these irregular local levies had to do all kinds of menial tasks, such as making trenches and barricades. In 1516, because of his defeat at Chaldiran due to the monopoly of firearms by the Ottomans in battle, Ismail I gave orders to create a corps of Tufengjis, or musketeers, under a commander called Tufengji Basha. Initially, the harquebusiers had a mainly local role, to defend their rural district. Increasingly, however, they were used to fight the Shah's battles outside their home district and to guard fortresses and defend cities. It gives a bunch of numbers, and there's quite a few Safavid musketeers over time. So they embraced firearms a lot earlier than I thought they did. I wasn't really clear on that myself. He just talks about there is an artillery corps, and then he goes on to discuss the Golams, which were basically probably the best Safavid Shah, Abbas, who reigns 1587 to 1629, creates basically a you can think of them like the Janissaries, so they're recruited from Armenian and Georgians, and they become like kind of the imperial royal guard type of thing, type of institution. Initially, the Golams were recruited from among the Chagatai, which is another Turkic group, Arab and Persian tribes from Khorasan, Azerbaijan, and Tabaristan, as well as riffraff from the main urban centers. Later, large numbers of Georgian, Armenian, and Circassian children and young men captured during the wars constituted the main recruiting grounds for the Golam Corps. There were two kinds of Golams, those that were eunuchs and those that were not. Non-eunuchs were trained for royal service in the army, administration, and royal workshops. So that gives an overview of their army composition. I do have a miniature painting that I can show. So this is supposed to be a, let's see if I can zoom in. This is supposed to be a painting. I'm not sure if it's Persian or Ottoman, but it's a battle between the two. And according to the internet search engine, it says it's from about 1600. So I'm going to trust that. But we do see, quite a mix of weapons. So on the right, that looks like, or on the left, sorry, that looks like the Ottoman side, because it seems like that's Janissary headgear. The style is a little different, so I think this is a Persian piece. I don't see any. There's no text on it. It's just an illustration, so I can't really try and read anything. But we see musketeers on both sides. Yeah, the cone hats. That's probably the Ottomans, because that was an Ottoman feature. But here on what is presumably the Persian side, you see a lot of cavalry, and then we have the cavalry here fighting. So mix of weapons. We've got musketeers, you've got horse, and there's even some archers, which is interesting. And even if this isn't like a literally true depiction of an actual battle, I think this is gives a good indication of, what an artist would have thought a battle looked like. And it seems like they were, it seems to show kind of a combined arms mentality, coordinating the shot and the cavalry. Now, one thing that's interesting, for both sides, is there's really no pikes. So I know the Ottomans, well, both the Ottomans and the Persians adopted sort of the wagon lager, Wagenburg, to absorb cavalry charges. The Safavids used that against the Uzbeks in one of their wars. But it is kind of interesting, I think, that they didn't really, they had a different strategy. And maybe because of the cavalry, there was the Turco-Mongol cavalry tradition, maybe. I don't know. That's just a speculation, but it is kind of interesting, because the Ottomans didn't really adopt the bayonet until quite late. I mean, they didn't really have the socket bayonets until the 18th century, I think, or even the plug bayonet, for that matter. And another thing I do find interesting, and it could just be artistic license with the way these are painted, but it's always hard to tell what the sort of accoutrements were for either side. I mean, this painting shows they've got some belt pouches and stuff. No bandoliers, though. So one of those open questions, because as far as I know, I haven't been able to find. Well, there's one article maybe that I need to revisit before I say that, but I don't remember off the top of my head if there was ever any kind of Ottoman manual of arms that was written down, or if they recorded that in detail, because a lot of this stuff was kind of taken for granted. So yeah, interesting painting. Gives kind of an idea of the fighting. It says this was made around 1600, so this would have been when Shah Abbas kind of has solidified his reign and takes the fight to the Ottomans. So I think I'll wrap it up there. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something, and I will talk to you in the next video.